He doesn't vanish to escape. He vanishes to sharpen. While the world begs to be seen, he steps out of sight. And the moment he does, something dangerous begins to happen. Think about it. The loudest people you know feel easy to predict. You know their opinions before they speak. You know their next move because they announce it. Visibility feels like power, but it's actually exposure. When everyone can see you, everyone can study you. And when they can study you, they can anticipate you, control you. Ghost mode begins where that ends. Right now, most men are broadcasting their lives like an open diary. Every thought posted, every emotion explained, every setback turned into content. They believe this visibility creates connection. In reality, it creates a map of their weaknesses. Power never lives in the open. Power grows where observation is one-sided. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The strongest version of you cannot be built while you are constantly reacting to the noise of others. Every notification pulls your attention outward. Every opinion chips away at your inner authority. You are not thinking. You are responding. And a man who only responds is never in control of the game. He's just playing the role assigned to him. Ghost mode is not about hiding from life. It's about reclaiming authorship over it. When you stop announcing every move, you stop inviting interference. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop negotiating your value. Silence becomes a boundary. Distance becomes armor. Most people fear disappearing because they equate attention with existence. If no one sees me, do I still matter? That fear alone reveals how dependent the modern man has become on external validation. He doesn't know who he is without an audience. So the idea of silence feels like death. But that death is exactly what makes rebirth possible. Imagine your mind as a forge. Noise keeps the fire scattered. Sparks flying everywhere. Nothing solid forms. Silence concentrates heat. It burns away distractions. It hardens intention. In that heat, weaknesses surface. Laziness, fear, insecurity. Ghost mode forces you to face them without distraction. No applause to hide behind. No opinions to borrow. Just you and what you've avoided becoming responsible for. This is why disappearing feels uncomfortable at first. Your mind will reach for stimulation the way lungs reach for air underwater. That panic is not danger, it's detox. You are withdrawing from the addiction of being seen. Stay there long enough and something shifts. Thoughts slow. Patterns emerge. You begin to see how often your choices were shaped by expectation rather than strategy. The crowd trains you to perform. Ghost mode trains you to observe. And observation is where leverage is born. While others react to headlines, you read incentives. While others argue, you measure timing. While others chase approval, you build capacity. This is not arrogance. This is preparation. Think of a blade being sharpened. It is pulled away from battle, not because it is weak, but because dull steel is useless in real combat. Ghost mode is that whetstone. Friction without applause. Pressure without praise. The kind of work no one celebrates, but everyone feels the effects of later. Here is the first rule. Stop narrating your life. Let people wonder. Let them guess. Mystery is not deception. It is strategic restraint. The less they know about your inner world, the harder it is to influence you. And influence is the true currency of power. You don't disappear to be forgotten. You disappear so that when you return, you are no longer predictable. And a man who cannot be predicted cannot be controlled. Once the noise fades, something unsettling happens. You begin to hear thoughts you didn't choose, old voices, old fears, opinions you absorbed so long ago that you mistook them for your own. This is the real reason most people never stay silent long enough. Solitude doesn't just remove distraction, it exposes contamination. Modern life trains you to confuse stimulation with identity. Podcasts tell you what to think, feeds tell you what to want. Conversations fill every gap, so you never sit long enough to ask where your impulses actually come from. Ghost mode cuts that supply, and without it, the borrowed thoughts start to collapse. At first, the silence feels empty. Then it feels loud. Your mind scrambles to recreate the crowd internally. You replay arguments, imagine judgments, hypothetical criticisms. This is the residue of dependence. You were never as independent as you thought. You were being carried by constant feedback. Now you're standing alone, and your legs feel weak because they were never trained. Stay there. This is where the transformation begins. When the external noise dies, internal clarity rises. Not the shallow clarity of motivation quotes, but the ruthless kind. You start seeing patterns instead of emotions. You notice how often urgency wasn't yours, how many goals were social imitations, how many fears belonged to other people's expectations. This is why silence is dangerous. It strips away excuses. There's no one to impress, so effort becomes honest. No one to blame, so responsibility becomes unavoidable. Ghost mode turns your attention inward and asks a brutal question. What are you actually capable of when no one is watching? Most men turn back here. They mistake discomfort for failure. They rush back to noise, calling it balance or connection. But what they're really doing is re-entering the cage. The cage feels comfortable because it removes accountability. In the crowd, mediocrity blends in. Alone, it stands out. Those who stay begin to feel something rare: internal authority. Decisions stop needing approval. You don't ask, "How will this look?" You ask, "What does this lead to?" That shift alone separates strategists from spectators. Reaction gives way to calculation. Emotion gives way to timing. Think of a chessboard. The amateur reacts to every threat. The master steps back, watches the whole board, and lets the opponent expose himself. Silence gives you the same advantage in life. When you stop reacting immediately, others reveal their intentions, their impatience, their neediness, their insecurity. You gain information without giving any away. This is why powerful people often appear slow. They aren't slow. They're gathering leverage. While others burn energy proving themselves, they conserve it. While others speak to be understood, they listen to understand. And understanding always beats expression. Ghost mode also recalibrates your sense of time. When you're constantly visible, you're pressured to move fast, to respond, to keep up. Silence breaks that rhythm. Time stretches. Long-term thinking becomes possible again. You start measuring decisions in months and years instead of reactions and impressions. Here's the paradox. The less you explain yourself, the more weight your actions carry. The less you speak, the more people listen when you finally do. Absence creates gravity. Not because you're playing games, but because you're no longer cheap. Cheap is always available. Cheap always responds. Cheap fills silence out of fear. Power does the opposite. Power lets silence breathe. It allows space to do the work. This is the second rule. Use silence to cleanse your mind before you try to change your life. Strategy built on borrowed thoughts collapses under pressure. Strategy built in solitude holds. You are not losing connection, you are severing dependence. And dependence is the quiet enemy of power. When you can stand alone without reaching for noise, you become difficult to manipulate. And when you become difficult to manipulate, the game starts shifting in your favor. Now comes the phase nobody talks about, the social backlash. The moment you enter ghost mode, people don't just notice your absence, they interpret it. And their interpretations reveal everything about them. Some will call you distant, others will call you arrogant. Some will act offended, as if your silence is an attack. Understand what's happening. Your withdrawal is removing their access, and access is what most people confuse for closeness. When you were always available, you weren't necessarily valued. You were expected. You were part of their routine, a resource, a predictable outlet. Ghost mode breaks that entitlement. And entitlement always protests when it loses control. This is the first real test of your power. Can you hold your position without explaining it? Most men fail right here. They vanish for a day, then return with apologies. Sorry, I've been busy. Sorry, I've been overwhelmed. Sorry, I didn't respond. That apology seems polite, but it's a confession. It tells the world your silence needs permission. It teaches them your boundaries are negotiable. Ghost mode is not a mood. It's a stance. The old version of you was trained to smooth tension, to make others comfortable, to stay nice, so nobody misunderstands. But power isn't built by constantly correcting other people's feelings. Power is built by controlling your own frame. And frame means you decide your rhythm, not the crowd, not your inbox, not the people who only show up to pull from you. Machiavelli watched this in courts long before phones existed. A man who is too familiar becomes easy to dismiss. A man who is too accessible becomes easy to control. The prince who is everywhere becomes ordinary, but the one who controls his appearances becomes inevitable. People wait for him. People whisper about him. People adjust around him. This is where ghost mode stops being private self-improvement and becomes a public weapon. Because absence creates a vacuum, and humans cannot tolerate a vacuum. They fill it with stories. The less you say, the more they project. And projection is power, because while they're busy guessing, you are busy building. Think about a locked door. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It simply refuses entry. The people outside will call it rude, cold, unfair. But the door's job isn't to be liked. Its job is to protect what's inside. That's what your silence becomes. A locked door. And here's what happens next. Your value rises in proportion to your scarcity. Not because you became better overnight, but because you stopped leaking yourself everywhere. You stopped being a public utility. You became selective, controlled, harder to access, harder to influence. That alone changes the social balance. In relationships, this is immediate. People who used to take you for granted start checking their tone. They become more careful. They test you less. Not because you threaten them, but because you disrupted their certainty. The old you was predictable. The new you is not. In work, it's even sharper. When you stop oversharing, you stop offering free ammunition. When you stop talking to fill space, you stop diluting your authority. When you stop reacting instantly, you stop being governed by other people's urgency. Urgency is how people control you. They act like everything needs an answer now. Ghost mode trains you to pause, to weigh, to choose. And that pause terrifies manipulators, because a pause is where their leverage dies. This is the third rule. Never let the crowd set your tempo. Tempo is command. The one who forces speed controls the frame, but the one who can slow the room down controls the outcome. That's why the final voice after silence carries more weight than 1,000 noisy opinions. Now let's get tactical. Ghost mode doesn't mean you disappear randomly like a ghost with no mission. It means you reduce visibility while increasing capability. You do the work that creates results without advertising the process. You build in private until opposition becomes irrelevant. Because here's the brutal reality. If people know what you're building too early, they will interfere. Not always out of malice, sometimes out of jealousy, sometimes out of advice, sometimes out of doubt. But interference is interference. And the quickest way to kill momentum is to invite too many eyes onto a fragile project. A seed doesn't grow in a spotlight. It grows underground. Your discipline needs darkness. Your plans need quiet. Your evolution needs privacy. So when you go ghost, you're not disappearing from life. You're disappearing from noise, from pointless debates, from performative conversations, from relationships that feed on your availability, from environments that reward your old compliance. And if someone panics when you pull back, that tells you the truth. They were attached to your presence, not to your growth. Hold the line. Because once you endure the backlash without collapsing into explanations, something changes in you. You stop needing to be understood. And the moment you stop needing to be understood, you become dangerous. Not loud dangerous, not dramatic dangerous, quiet dangerous. Like a storm forming beyond the horizon while everyone else argues about the weather. After the initial silence settles, a deeper transformation begins. Not the kind people can see, but the kind they feel. This is where ghost mode stops being an action and becomes an internal condition. You notice it first in your reactions, or rather, the lack of them. Things that once hooked you emotionally now pass without friction. A comment that would have lingered in your mind all day barely registers. An insult no longer demands a reply. Praise doesn't inflate you. Criticism doesn't wound you, not because you become numb, but because you've reclaimed ownership of your inner state. Before this, your emotions were on a leash held by the world. Anyone could tug it. A message, a tone, a look. Your mood rose and fell based on external signals. That wasn't openness. That was vulnerability without defense. Ghost mode cuts the leash. You are no longer emotionally outsourced. This is emotional sovereignty. When feedback stops being your fuel, your nervous system recalibrates. You stop scanning the environment for approval or threat. Your mind quiets. And in that quiet, judgment sharpens. You begin to see situations without the fog of urgency or ego. You don't rush to prove. You don't rush to explain. You wait. And waiting, when deliberate, is dominance. Think of a fortress. It isn't strong because it attacks constantly. It's strong because it doesn't need to. Its power lies in what it withstands. Ghost mode builds that same structure internally. Every moment you resist reacting is another layer of stone. Every urge to justify yourself that you let pass is another wall reinforced. This inner stability changes how you choose. You stop chasing immediate relief and start favoring long-term position. You stop asking, how does this make me feel right now? And start asking, where does this place me later? That single shift separates the impulsive from the strategic. Patience becomes natural, not forced. You no longer feel anxious when things are unresolved. You understand that clarity arrives with time, not speed. While others rush to close loops, you let them stay open until the pattern reveals itself. And patterns always reveal leverage. Silence now works for you. When you don't rush to speak, others do. They fill the space with explanations, emotions, and tells. You learn more by listening than you ever did by arguing. The less you reveal, the more information flows toward you. It's an uneven exchange, and that imbalance is power. Your time also begins to obey you again. Without constant interruptions, your days stretch. Focus deepens, work compounds. You're no longer living on other people's timelines. This is structural independence. Your life stops orbiting around demands and starts revolving around intention. Here is the critical rule. Never apologize for guarding your time, your focus, or your peace. An apology implies you've done something wrong. You haven't. Selectivity is not cruelty, it's strategy. As this state solidifies, your presence changes. When you enter a room, you're not performing. You're anchored. You speak less, but your words carry weight because they're not diluted by noise. People sense that you're no longer seeking anything from them, and that absence of need creates gravity. Ghost mode has stripped away dependency. What remains is control, not over others, but over yourself. And that control is the rarest form of power there is. This is no longer withdrawal. This is positioning. The return is the most misunderstood moment of ghost mode. People think disappearing is the power. It's not. The power is what you come back as. When you re-enter the world after silence, you don't announce it. You don't explain where you've been. You don't justify the change. You simply move differently. And that difference is felt immediately. Your timing is sharper. Your words are fewer. Your presence carries weight because it is no longer common. You're not rushing to respond, impress, or align. You're acting from a center that doesn't wobble when pressure appears. This is when others begin to feel uneasy around you, even if they can't articulate why. Because you're no longer reacting to the environment. The environment is reacting to you. This is the final evolution of ghost mode. Sovereignty. You've broken the habit of urgency. You no longer confuse motion with progress. When opportunities appear, you don't grab at them. You evaluate. When conflict arises, you don't rush to defend yourself. You observe. And when you decide to move, it feels sudden to everyone else, because the preparation happened in silence. Think of a trap door. Closed, it's invisible. Opened, it's decisive. There is no warning, no debate, no build-up. That's how your actions now land. Clean, precise, final. People will say you've changed. They're right. But what they're sensing isn't attitude. It's independence. You no longer need to be understood. You no longer need agreement. You no longer need to stay connected to everyone who once had access to you. And the moment you stop needing, power quietly transfers back into your hands. Here's the truth most never reach. The crowd isn't evil, it's just loud. And loud environments reward conformity, speed, and reaction. Ghost mode removes you from that frequency long enough to recalibrate your internal compass. When you return, you're no longer vibrating at the crowd's pace. You're steady, and steadiness bends chaos. This is why silence terrifies manipulators. They rely on reaction, on predictable emotional responses, on the ability to rush you. When none of that works anymore, they lose leverage. They can't provoke you. They can't bait you. They can't control the frame. You've become unreadable. Unreadable doesn't mean cold. It means contained. Your emotions still exist, but they're no longer public tools others can pull. You feel fully, but you choose carefully, like a blade that stays sheathed until the moment demands it. And now comes the final choice. Ghost mode is not meant to last forever. It's meant to change you forever. Once you've built the inner fortress, you don't hide behind it. You operate from it. You engage selectively. You speak intentionally. You disappear only when it strengthens your position. This is the rhythm of power. Presence, then absence, then decisive return. Most men live at full exposure, all the time. That's why they're exhausted, reactive, and replaceable. You've learned another way. You know how to step back without collapsing, how to be alone without losing direction, how to build without applause. And because of that, you now carry something rare. Gravity. Not the kind that shouts, the kind that pulls everything else toward it. The lesson is simple, but not easy. Before power can be shown, it must be forged. Before influence can be exercised, it must be insulated. Before you can move the world, you must first be unmoved by it. Disappear when necessary. Return when it matters. And when you do, return as a man who no longer asks for space, because space rearranges itself around him.